The mission is simple: to help high achievers naturally eliminate emotional and physical obstacles so they can optimize their life for higher achievement. Welcome. You have just entered the Genesis Zone. Well, I guess it would help if I had the camera on. Good day and welcome to the Genesis Zone show. That's what you get when you do a live show sometimes. This is Dr. Brian Brown. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us on this beautiful Thursday. Scientists have discovered a genetic link to longevity. Some people have the good version, quote unquote, of this gene, but some have the bad version, quote unquote, of this gene. If you have the bad version of this gene, are there some things you can do to work around this challenge and boost longevity effects anyway? Stay tuned today as we discover the answer to this question. So, researchers at Cornell University have found a genetic link to longevity. Interestingly, the control of longevity lies on a gene that regulates stress responses and the effects of stress in the brain. More specifically, it preserves the brain from the progressive death of brain cells that frequently result from chronic stress. Now, this gene, not that you need to know, but this gene is called the FOX, F-O-X-O3 gene. And it's strongly tied to the methylation cycle. And anybody that's been hanging around for very long on the show, you've heard me talk about methylation multiple times. But without proper methylation, as you'll see here in a moment, managing stress's impacts on the brain is very difficult. Scientists have known for some time that overexposure to stress can come from many sources. A few examples are inflammation, whether that be inflammation throughout the body or inflammation in the brain, radiation exposure. And I'm not talking about necessarily standing in front of an X-ray machine. I'm talking about radiation exposure that occurs in our environment from power lines and electronic media equipment that we expose ourselves to all the time. And it can also come from electromagnetic field exposure. It can come from emotional trauma. It can come from physical trauma. And it can come from lack of healthy nutritional intake, just to name a few. But here's the rub. It's a massive domino effect of events that leads to this decrease in longevity, and it's all surrounding stress. If stress levels are too high, the FOXO3 gene and the FOXO3 protein that gene controls become damaged from the high levels of free radicals or the oxidative stress that is elevated due to this stress from whatever source it is that's going on in the body. Now, this damaged protein, the FOXO3 protein, when it becomes damaged, goes into the nucleus on the inside of the nerve cell, and it turns on other stress response genes. Now, when this happens, there's an impairment, and this impairs the brain's ability to create new brain cells and results in the death of existing or older brain cells. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that without the ability to preserve old brain cells and create new ones, our capacity to learn new things and remember the things that we've already learned are pretty much taken away. So just so far, you understand that this FOXO3 protein gets damaged by the effects of stress. This damaged protein goes on the inside of the cell where it then starts wreaking havoc. And before you know it, we're turning off the brain's ability to create new brain cells and preserve old brain cells. Next, the dominoes continue to fall and the brain becomes depleted of a compound called S-adenylmethionine. You don't need to know it by that. Just know it by SAM, S-A-M. SAM is formed as a result of proper methylation. As a compound, SAM plays many important roles in the brain. Now, one role is that it's the foundation of forming our neurotransmitters. But in this particular case, S-adenylmethionine or SAM helps the body produce a protective envelope around the DNA of stem cells in the brain. And if this protective envelope is missing, the DNA just kind of leaks out of the cell. Everything becomes confused and the DNA spreads where it's not supposed to go. Here's the problem with that. The end result is that you end up with an autoimmune response in the brain because the body's immune system mistakes the leaking DNA as a virus. It thinks it's a virus and it will attack it as such. And I'll say it again, the word immune is synonymous with inflammation. So when you hear autoimmune, think autoinflammation. And we get this massive inflammatory response in the brain. So what are we going to do about this? We now know that when the FOXO3 protein is damaged due to stress, it goes on the inside of the cell. It ultimately leads to a depletion in S-adenylmethionine or SAM, and it causes a leakage of DNA material, which turns on an autoimmune response in the brain. Obviously, this is not good for longevity because if our brain function is declining, our physical function is declining. And so our life becomes shortened because our brain health is becoming shortened. So what are we to do about this? What are some grassroots things that we can do right now to protect this? Well, I believe there are two takeaways from this particular study based on the current scientific knowledge that we have and the current research that we currently have. The number one thing that we need to take away from this is that we should support our methylation at all cost. And this means checking your methylation genes and knowing exactly where you stand in all 5 phases of the methylation pathway. And once you have this foundational knowledge, put a plan in place to support your methylation genes. We've known for years in the field of sports science that high performance athletes will deplete B vitamins at an alarming rate. So we can take a person who's a performance athlete and we can look at their methylation genes and see how they process B vitamins. And then if they're a high performance athlete, we have to then actually up the ante some and say, okay, we know they need just on a general level, this level of support with their B vitamins. But because they're a performance athlete and they deplete them more rapidly than the average bear, we need to actually increase those doses. Now, I don't recommend that you necessarily do that on your own. I do recommend that you work with somebody who's a functional medicine or naturopathic person or an epigenetic specialist like myself that can help you through this process. But nevertheless, using the example out of sports medicine and how rapidly high performance athletes deplete B vitamins, we also know that people who are under a tremendous amount of stress deplete B vitamins at an alarming rate, very similar to performance athletes. So the bottom line and the common denominator there is it's stress. Stress depletes B vitamins, regardless of whether it's good stress, eustress that comes from performance athleticism, or it's negative stress that comes from the stress of physical insults to our body or emotional insults to our mind. The number 2 takeaway is this: we should support our body's inflammatory and detoxification pathways at all costs, very similar to methylation pathways. This may mean taking higher doses of antioxidants, just like we take higher doses of B vitamins during stressful times, or I'm recommending that we take those higher doses during stressful times. We should also take higher doses of antioxidants during stressful times. Again, this comes out of sports literature as well as emotional health literature, psychology literature, psychiatry literature. If a person is under a lot of stress, their oxidative stress levels go really, really high. And it doesn't matter, again, if that oxidative stress is coming from working out too intensely or you're a performance athlete and it's just what you do, it's a normal part of your everyday routine, or you're under emotional stress from what's going on in your environment, or you've fallen and broken a leg. regardless, your oxidative stress level is higher. And the only thing we can do to get that down is support those with antioxidants, make sure that we're eating an anti-inflammatory diet, and so on and so forth. So during this time, with the number two takeaway in supporting our inflammatory and detoxification pathways, we may need to take higher doses of antioxidants during that time. The good news is antioxidants are water soluble. So if your body doesn't need them, it's not going to be able to use them. Guess what? You pee it out. So I don't know any better way to say that, but you just get rid of it. You excrete it. And so if you bump up your resveratrol levels, you bump up your sulforaphane levels, you bump up your, say, vitamin C levels and things like that, your oligomeric proanthocyanins, it's totally different class of antioxidants, probably one of the best classes of antioxidants. If you bump those levels up during these stressful times, it's a good thing. But it may also mean that we need to adjust our diet, and we need to eat a low inflammatory diet all the time, so that we have this protective baseline, this protective layer there in place all the time. And then we can adjust with supplementation if needed. It may mean exercising regularly, but not over-exercising. Over-exercising can turn eustress, a good stress, into a bad stress. It may mean understanding your genetic blueprint when it comes to inflammation and detoxification management. And there are a ton of genes that we look at on our standard profile at my office when we're looking at detoxification and inflammation. And then once you know your blueprint, being able to put a plan in place that supports those imbalances with regard to inflammation and detoxification genes. So I'll leave you with this. If you're curious about knowing your genetic blueprint, whether it's the 5 phases of methylation or whether it's inflammation management or detoxification management, for the sake of longevity, I'm not saying this is a longevity fix. I'm just saying that with the knowledge that we have right now, based on this new research study that I just talked about, you deserve to have your genetics tested. You really do. You deserve to know your genetic blueprint. And if you want to know more about that, if you want to discuss this with me, please message me on Instagram or Facebook at Dr. Brian G. Brown. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. I'll be glad to open up a dialogue with you, and just help you in any way I can. So that's all I've got for this week. Tune in next Thursday at noon Eastern Standard Time for our next In the Zone segment, where I'll be sharing the latest research and my insights about that research as it relates to optimizing your physical and emotional wellness journey, as it relates to optimizing your genes. Most informed, most trusted, and most grateful that you took time out of your schedule to spend this time with us today. Until next time, stay in the zone. I'm Dr. Brian Brown.